And without further ado, let me ask Dean Richard Revesz of the New York University School of Law to start things.
Thank you so much. Welcome. I'm delighted to be here this morning, welcoming you to NYU Law School and hosting the presentation of the Women's Right Prize from the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation. I feel that the lives of the foundation at NYU Law School have become very nicely intertwined in recent years, and makes me very pleased. I first welcomed the Gruber Foundation to the law school, to this room here, for this particular event in 2007, and was really impressed by its mission to recognize the often unsung efforts of working to ensure our civil liberties. Back then, that year, the Women's Right Prize went to Pinar Icaracan and two organizations that she helped found, Women for Women's Human Rights, New Ways, and Coalition for Sexual and Bodily Rights in Muslim Societies. She worked for ending violence and discrimination against women in Turkey and its surrounding regions. And it was a wonderful event, as I'm sure today will be an equally wonderful event. And then in 2008, the foundation awarded its International Justice Prize to one of NYU Law School's most distinguished alumni, the Honorable Tom Bergenthal, who is the U.S. judge on the International Court of Justice. And I was really pleased to be invited to come to Washington, D.C. and pay tribute to his work, which started. He was a Holocaust survivor who, in very roundabout ways, ended up on a scholarship at NYU Law School, eventually got on to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, helped end Guatemala's execution of human rights activists by special tribunals, and eventually made his way up to the International Court of Justice. And there was a very moving set of tributes for Tom, who's a truly magnificent person. And then only a year later, my extraordinary colleague Brian Stevenson, who is one of our nation's foremost death penalty litigators and teaches a wonderful death penalty clinic here at the law school, received the International Justice Prize as well for his work providing representation to prisoners in Alabama who've been denied fair treatment in our legal system. And I know from conversations with them that it was very meaningful for Tom and Brian. It was sort of a capstone of wonderful careers to receive this really prestigious honor. And I'm now really pleased to extend my congratulations to the 2010 Women's Right Prize winners, the Center for Reproductive Rights and CLADEM, Comité de América, Latina y el Caribe para la Defensa de los Derechos de la Mujer. The recognition for the work you have done to advance the rights of women in the U.S. and abroad is extremely well deserved. I want to recognize Patricia Gruber. The award winners deserve endless praise, but so do Peter and Patricia Gruber, who had a wonderful idea and have carried it out in an extraordinarily professional and serious way for many years. And they deserve enormous admiration for what they have done, for bringing the spotlight on organizations and individuals who deserve attention and often don't get quite the attention that they deserve. So it's a great honor to welcome you here. Patricia, as you know, has led the foundation with her husband Peter since its founding in 1993, and is now its president. She has also been involved in a number of other important philanthropic activities, both on the mainland, in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I have great admiration for Patricia. So it's a great honor to leave you in her hands, a wonderful advocate for human rights, Patricia Gruber.
Thank you, Dean Revesz, for those really warm, kind, welcoming words. We are really delighted to be here at the beautiful Greenberg Lounge at New York Law School. And New York University School of Law has an outstanding record of academic excellence and support of human rights around the world. This was one of the first law schools to admit women. Again, we thank Dean Revesz for his warm welcome. I know you have to leave for many other appointments, but we thank you for coming this morning. We are here, as Dean Rivez said, to honor the achievements of the Center for Reproductive Rights and CLADEM, two organizations that through litigation, law reform, and education have significantly advanced the cause of women's reproductive health and freedom in many countries in the face of resistance to women's reproductive rights. I'd first like to tell you about the company they are keeping with the other awards. The Foundation's Prize Program, which was established in 2000, now presents 5 annual prizes of $500,000 each in the fields of cosmology, genetics, neuroscience, justice, and women's rights. Each prize recognizes achievements and discoveries that produce fundamental shifts in human knowledge and culture. In October, the Justice Prize will be presented to Michael Kirby, John Dugard, and the Indian Law Center at the George Washington University School of Law. Later that month, at the University of Chicago, the Cosmology Prize will be presented to Charles Steidel. In November, the Genetics Prize will be presented to Gerald Fink at the 60th annual meeting of the American Society of Human Genetics, again in Washington. And later in November, the Neuroscience Prize will be presented at the 41st annual meeting of the Society for Neuroscience in San Diego to Robert Wirtz. I'd like to acknowledge the vision and generosity of my husband, Peter Gruber, in establishing these prizes. Peter is not well and cannot be with us today, but sends his warm congratulations to today's recipients and his encouragement. We award the Women's Rights Prize annually to honor courageous efforts anywhere in the world to help achieve gender equality. The past laureates of the Women's Rights Prize are, most recent first, Lema Bowie and the Women's Legal Center, Yanar Mohammed, Sapna Pradhanmala, and Nadera Shalub-Kevorkian. Pinar Ilkarajan, Women for Women's Human Rights, and the Coalition for Sexual and Body Rights. The Unión Nacional de Mujeres Guatemaltecas, Cecilia Medina Quiroga, who is here with us today, and Sweatshop Watch. The Women's League of Burma and the Shan Women's Action Network. Sakina Yakubi and the Afghan Institute of Learning, and Sakina is here with us today. Navanitham Pillay and Profam Twese Hamwe. And now to the presentation of today's 2010 prize. A distinguished board of international advisors has guided the selection of this year's recipients. The members are Sakiko Fukuda Par, Geeta Rao Gupta, Pinar Ilkarajan, Aqua Kenyuhe, Cecilia Medina Quiroga, Tandabantu Nlapo, who is here with us today, and Sakina Yakubi. My husband Peter and I deeply appreciate the knowledge, the commitment, and the enthusiasm that the judges bring to this process. Before asking our recipients to step forward, I'd like to invite a member of our advisory board to read the official prize citation. And I am looking here with Carol Jenkins, our moderator today, has kindly agreed to read the citation for us. Thank you. Sorry.
I'm so pleased to be here. The official citation to the prize reads, the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation proudly presents the 2010 Women's Rights Prize to the Center for Reproductive Rights, a U.S.-based organization that uses the law to protect women's reproductive freedom, and the Latin American and Caribbean Committee for the Defense of Women's Rights, known as CLADEM, a network of activists and organizations from countries in the region committed to the defense of women's rights as human rights for their historic collaboration in advancing women's sexual and reproductive rights and successfully holding governments accountable for complying with international treaties and standards on women's rights. And I now ask Geeta Rao Gupta, the former president of the International Center for Research on Women, to say a few words about one of our two recipients, the Center for Reproductive Rights. Geeta.
It is my great honor to introduce to you today the extraordinary work of a remarkable organization, the Center for Reproductive Rights. Reproductive freedom lies at the heart of the promise of human dignity, self-determination, and equality as embodied both in the U.S. Constitution and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Center for Reproductive Rights works towards a time when that promise is enshrined in law in the United States and throughout the world. For more than 15 years, the Center has used the law to advance reproductive freedom as a fundamental human right that all governments are legally obligated to protect, respect, and fulfill. Since 1992, their attorneys have boldly used legal and human rights tools to ensure that every woman is free to decide whether and when to have children, guarantee women access to the best reproductive health care available, and make certain that women everywhere can exercise their choices without coercion or discrimination. Through groundbreaking cases before national courts, UN committees, and regional human rights bodies, the Center for Reproductive Rights has successfully strengthened laws and policies in more than 50 countries. They have influenced the law outside the courtroom as well by documenting abuses, working with policymakers to promote progressive measures, and fostering legal scholarship and teaching on reproductive health and human rights. And they do all this in partnership with local lawyers and advocates to ensure that their strategies are sensitive to and effective in each unique culture, economic, and political context. Their effectiveness is in part due to this local focus, but also because they combine that with a global reach. They build on their success in any given country to improve the lives of women everywhere. In fact, it was their effective partnership with the regional network, CLADEM, and their ability to hold a government accountable that made them stand out among a group of many excellent contenders to be selected for the 2010 Gruber Foundation Women's Rights Prize. Congratulations on this well-deserved recognition. On behalf of my colleagues on the committee and the Gruber Foundation, many thanks for fighting for women's rights and reproductive justice the world over.
And now we would like to invite a previous recipient of the prize, Cecilia Medina Quiroga, who is a professor of international human rights law at the University of Chile, to say a few words about CLADEM, our second recipient. Cecilia?
Thank you very much. I am also honored that I have been asked to say some words about CLADEM, one of this year's recipients of the Women's Rights Prize for the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation. I have known CLADEM for many years. It started as a coalition of a few groups in a few countries in 1987 and developed to what exists today, a committee of many countries, both in Latin America and the Caribbean islands. I have come across a significant number of women NGOs during my many years of activities with women, and I have rarely found women with the extension of the commitment that CLADEM women possess. They have worked under extremely hard conditions voluntarily in a continent where earning a living is often a major task. Their mission is also a testing one. They deal with women's autonomy and therefore with discrimination, political autonomy, economic autonomy, and autonomy of the body, where we find reproductive rights and violence, have all been addressed by the various organizations that form part of this committee. The two recipients of this year's prize obtained through litigation a landmark decision from the Human Rights Committee with regard to the positive obligations of a Latin American state concerning abortion. Finally, I have to acknowledge, because I think it is very important, the wisdom of CLADEM as it has tried and succeeded to incorporate in the alliance not only women's NGOs, but human rights NGOs of all sorts, thereby expressing their firm commitment of the idea that women's struggle is the struggle for a society where discrimination on all grounds should be eradicated. I wholeheartedly give them my support and my gratitude for all they have done, and hope that you will continue to do so. Nancy Northup of the Center for Reproductive Rights and Norma Enríquez from CLADEM, please come forward to receive the prize.
Thank you. You go there.
Well, what a great way to start a morning. On behalf of the Center for Reproductive Rights Board of Trustees and staff, an enormous thanks to the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation for this great honor. I am pleased to have with me today, representing the Center, Roberta Schneiderman, who's the Secretary of our Board of Trustees, and NYU Professor Sylvia Law, who is a founding member of the Center's board and still serves. Also with me is Luisa Cabal and Lillian Sepulveda, who are the Director and Deputy Director of our International Legal Program. This award is a testament to the vision, back in 1992, of our founder, Janet Benshoff, and our founding board and staff and our donors. They saw a critical need for a global organization that would advance a simple, but dare I say audacious mission, to advance reproductive rights as human rights that all governments around the world would be legally obligated to respect and protect and fulfill. That vision has been increasingly realized as national level courts and regional and international human rights bodies have indeed recognized in significant decisions that reproductive rights are legally enforceable human rights and have held governments accountable. This award is also a well-deserved recognition for our tireless and excellent staff of 70, outstanding lawyers and human rights advocates who deal every day with the stress of working on the still highly contested issues of women's sexual and reproductive self-determination. We love what we do, but sometimes it's stressful, and to be recognized just feels good. Finally, and very importantly, it is especially meaningful to us at the Center for Reproductive Rights to share this award with CLADEM, because sharing this prize represents how we do our work at the Center for Reproductive Rights. In partnership with NGOs around the world, we have worked with CLADEM for over 15 years on fact-finding reports, UN advocacy, and litigation. Together with CLADEM, we successfully brought the first coercive sterilization case and the first case of rape in healthcare facilities before the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. Together, we won the first abortion case before the UN Human Rights Committee. That groundbreaking 2006 decision, KL versus Peru, found that Peru's denial of a therapeutic abortion was cruel and degrading treatment because the woman's suffering and mental anguish was foreseeable. We greatly appreciate this honor. It energizes us to continue the fight for universal respect for women's lives and dignity and equality. Thank you so much to the Gruber Foundation.
Buenos días, señores y señoras.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
En nombre de las organizaciones y personas que conforman el Comité de América Latina y el Caribe para la Defensa de los Derechos de las Mujeres, CLADEM,
On behalf of Latin American and Caribbean Committee for the Defense on Women's Rights, CLADEM,
quiero expresar nuestro agradecimiento al señor y la señora Gruber,
I would like to say my warmest thanks to Mr. and Mrs. Gruber,
a los miembros de su fundación y a las ilustres integrantes del jurado del premio.
to the members of the foundation and the wonderful members of the jury that gave us the prize.
Asimismo, aprovecho la oportunidad para felicitar a nuestras compañeras y aliadas del Centro de los Derechos Reproductivos.
Also, I would like to say that I want to congratulate our comrades and allies for the Center for Reproductive Rights.
Quiero resaltar la importancia que este premio tiene para nuestra organización.
I want to say something important about this prize and that how important it is for our organization.
Pues si bien las leyes y las políticas públicas constituyen una formidable herramienta,
Even though the laws and the public policies are a formidable tool
para que las mujeres puedan exigir a los estados garantías para el disfrute de sus derechos fundamentales,
so that women can demand the states guarantee their fundamental rights,
instituciones como la Fundación Gruber contribuyen con su prestigio a legitimar socialmente nuestro trabajo.
institutions like the Gruber Foundation contribute to legitimize our work.
Al respaldar nuestra lucha para que se reconozca la capacidad plena de las mujeres,
Because they help us in our fight that the capacity of women is being acknowledged,
para construir responsablemente y de manera autónoma sus proyectos de vida,
to build their projects in an autonomous way and their lives also,
y las obligaciones que tienen la sociedad y los estados de respetarlos.
and the obligations that the state and society have to respect them.
En este proceso de cimentación de las libertades en condiciones de igualdad para varones y mujeres,
In this process of building the conditions of equality for men and women,
nosotras contribuimos a la construcción de sociedades más tolerantes y respetuosas de todas las diferencias.
we contribute to the building of societies that are more tolerant and respectful to the differences.
Compartir este reconocimiento con personas y organizaciones que han dedicado su vida a hacer aportes significativos a la humanidad,
To share this acknowledgement with people and organizations that have dedicated their life to make significant changes to the humanity,
nos llena de orgullo y nos compromete a seguir trabajando con toda nuestra fuerza y convicción
makes us very proud, and we are compromised to continue working with all our strength and conviction
para lograr un mundo que supere las exclusiones, las discriminaciones y las violencias.
to make a world that will finish with the exclusions, discriminations, and violences.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you and congratulations to both of the 2010 recipients. Ladies and gentlemen, I now ask Linda Bash, President of the National Council for Research on Women and a former Selection Committee advisory member, to introduce the moderator for today's panel discussion, Sexual and Reproductive Rights as Women's Human Rights. Linda?
Thank you, Pat, and good morning, everyone. What an honor to be with you all at such an early hour. And I'm very grateful to Peter and Pat Gruber for inviting me to be involved with the Women's Rights Prize today. It has been so rewarding to have served on their advisory board and to get to know so many inspiring awardees and leaders over the years. Like the Gruber Foundation, the National Council for Research on Women, a 120-member center network, strives to advance the rights and opportunities for women and girls nationally and globally. Today, I'm so pleased to introduce my friend and dear colleague, Carol Jenkins, former president of the Women's Media Center, which we're proud is a member center of the Council, actually. Carol is a writer, producer, and Emmy Award-winning broadcaster. Carol enjoyed a distinguished career in television news, including 23 years at WNBC TV here in New York, where she co-anchored the 6 p.m. newscast. She also hosted her own daily talk show, Carol Jenkins Live, on WNYW TV. Carol is one of the greatest MC moderators of all times. Every event in which Carol has been involved, whether a panel of experts or one-on-one interviews, has been masterfully led with her unsurpassed insight and sparkle. She's a newswoman through and through. She brings intelligence, focus, and even an irreverent sense of humor, which I hope we'll hear a bit of today, which adds both lightness and a reality check to the many gatherings of thought leaders she is asked to moderate. She continues to bring her energy to women's and girls' rights and now chairs the board of the African Medical Research Foundation, known as AMRAF, the largest health organization operating in Africa. It's my delight and great privilege to introduce Carol Jenkins. Thank you. And I'm so sorry, a really big congratulations to the awardees today for your heroic work. Wonderful.
Good morning, and it's not so early anymore, you know. I mean, but you all were here, and we are thrilled that you are. I just want to say, first of all, thank you to Linda Bash, who is a terrific friend and an inspiration. She really is a great woman leader. A great leader of women and some men. And so thank you very much for that introduction. And I want to say how much I respect, what admiration I have for Patricia Gruber. What you have done over these years has just been extraordinary. And I hope you understand that this kind of generosity, this impact that you make, is unusual and really should be acclaimed, because it's just a gorgeous, terrific, dynamic gift to women and some of the men to whom you give the prizes as well. So we thank you so much for your contribution. We're joined by Lola Salas, who will be doing some interpreting for us. And next year, I promised that we would all be fluent in Spanish, so we wouldn't have to do that. I want to begin this conversation because I don't know how many of you have been engaged in the Millennium Development Goals and what's going on at the United Nations, other than your traffic has been eternally snarled. But I've been sitting in on some of the meetings in my role as chair of AMREF, looking at what we expect to have happen in 2015, the distance that we have to travel. So I wanted to ask our honorees today what they feel about it. And the question that I ask is, if you, at the end of this week's conversations received a gift. It's in a box. It's got a bow on it. What would it look like for your organization and for the work that you do?
Well, I think in connection with the Millennium Development Goals, I guess the gift we would like in the box to help move those goals to reality would be to have human rights incorporated in the approaches that are taken to meeting the important targets on reducing maternal mortality and having universal access to reproductive health. The goals are important. Obviously, it's the end game of what we do our work for. But I think what's often been missing in approaching those goals is understanding how critical it is to have human rights accountability in place. There are many places, and one of the places where we work is in India, in which there are actually good policies on the books about how to address reducing maternal mortality, and India leads the world in preventable maternal deaths. But those policies aren't implemented. And part of human rights accountability is making sure that governments, in fact, live up to what's written on the books. So we would like to see in that box human rights integrated into the approach to the Millennium Development Goals.
Are you optimistic that we make any progress this week? 5 years to go.
I'm always
Or as I heard someone phrase it recently, evidence-based hope. Is that the way you phrase that? Norma, and in terms of the Millennium Development Goals and your work, are you optimistic that any progress will be made this week at the United Nations?
Sí. Creo que estoy muy optimista porque una gran mujer va a estar representando nuestros intereses.
I think I'm very optimistic because a great woman is representing our interests.
Para nosotras, la señora Bachelet representa una real posibilidad de no solamente tener conocimiento, sino sensibilidad suficiente para luchar por nosotras.
And feelings to help all of us.
And how do you what are you looking for in terms of your work? What would make the difference to the work that you do on the ground every day?
Creo que la diferencia la haría el que las leyes cambiasen para dar herramientas a las mujeres para reclamar sus derechos.
The difference would be that if the laws change, so the tools would be in place for the women to change their rights.
Que los estados tradujesen esas leyes a políticas públicas.
That the states, governments would translate this to public policies.
Y que la sociedad en su conjunto
and that society together
fuese capaz de admitir
would be able to accept
que los varones y las mujeres
that women and men
tenemos la misma dignidad
we have the same dignity
y los mismos derechos.
And the same rights.
And now when you talk about making governments accountable, and you both have done it, how is that done? And I know that you've got one of the things that I love about the work that you do is that you train lawyers as well. You're in the law schools and you have them coming up so that they understand the new law and can really, take it on. But talk to us about, without these advances at the United Nations, how so far you've made governments adhere to your expectations.
All right, well, why don't I give an example that takes us far from the UN and back down to the ground, actually at the state level in India. So as I said before, huge issue with preventable maternal deaths in India. And about 7 years ago, we began working with our partners there, who are the Human Rights Law Network, on addressing in the courts, using the court strategy to address the government's failure to follow its own policies on preventing maternal deaths. So working with them, we worked on a series of cases, and one that we advised on just came out 3 months ago from the New Delhi High Court. And at the center of that case was 2 women, one who ended up dying in connection with her 6th pregnancy, and the other who gave birth unassisted under a tree in Delhi. And in both cases, there were policies on the books about both
admission to hospitals without having to pay fees, about nutritional support during pregnancy, all really terrific policies that have been shown to be effective in reducing maternal mortality. And yet, they were just willfully failed to follow. So, for example, the woman who ended up dying in connection with her 6th pregnancy, during her 5th pregnancy, went from hospital to hospital. She had fetal demise, and no one would admit her and treat her. And what the New Delhi High Court said in its decision in June was the government has to make these policies real. And it's got to come back to court with a plan for how to do that. So that is a very concrete example, close to the ground at the state level, and where the government is going to have to live up to its obligation. And you know, sometimes people say, well, you know, litigation, isn't that really sort of contentious with the government? But these are commitments in this case that the Indian government has already made. So it's a way to say make those commitments to women and preventing their deaths real. So it's really just holding the government up to what it's already agreed to do.
Yeah, I was reading last night your quite extensive report on Kenya in the Kibera, as you describe it, and I appreciate that settlement as opposed to what most people call it as the slum. But in Kibera, you have been doing some really intensive work there. Talk to us about the new constitution there, because you seem to be optimistic that this is going to hold good news for women in Kenya.
Well, the Center just did a report on unsafe abortion in Kenya, which has been a huge issue. And one of the issues has been how indeterminate it is what the law actually allows for. And the new constitution, abortion became a very contentious issue in the middle of that constitution. And it went back and forth between the political actors and the technical experts who were drafting the constitution. And at one point, the political actors put into the Constitution protecting life from the moment of conception, which would make, obviously, the embryo equivalent to a fully developed human being. And the technical experts put in an exception to make sure that there was abortion in the case of the life and health of the woman. So these two things are now living, together in the new Kenyan Constitution. But the reality is that provision that says that abortion must be accessible for the life and health of women will provide a legal wedge to work towards a day when Kenyan women can get access for their health and lives to safe abortion. Because the deaths from unsafe abortion are tragic in Kenya and need to be addressed. So there is some room there for further legal development.
And you're opening an office in Nairobi.
We are opening an office in Nairobi in November.
Okay, excellent. Norma, I want to explore some additionally about Michelle Bachelet, who's just been appointed the head of, I guess they're calling it UN Women. It's got a much more complicated title than that. Talk to us a little bit about what you expect she will bring, a Latina woman, to these issues of women's rights as human rights.
Bueno, yo espero que la señora Bachelet se sienta orgullosa.
I hope that Mrs. Bachelet will be very proud.
Cuando quiero o creo que las feministas queremos que pueda emular con la señora Cecilia Quiroga.
That if she can emulate Miss Cecilia Quiroga.
Esperamos que la señora Bachelet, que es conocedora de la situación que vivimos las mujeres en América en general, pero sobre todo en América Latina,
Mrs. Bachelet is very knowledgeable about the situation that women in America and in America in general live.
Contribuya a sensibilizar a los dirigentes de Naciones Unidas y de los gobiernos en general.
She can contribute to the sensitization of the governments and the staff of the UN in general.
Para que consideren que los estados deben privilegiar los derechos de las personas por encima de los intereses de algunas instituciones.
The states have to consider and prioritize
priorizar los intereses de las
the interest
personas,
of the people,
de la ciudadanía,
and the citizens,
por encima de los intereses de algunas instituciones, por respetables y antiguas que sean.
above the institution's interest.
There are some who criticized her in Chile for not pursuing a very aggressive reproductive rights agenda in her own country. Do you feel that she is on the positive side of this issue?
Es verdad, las compañeras chilenas tuvieron que dar una dura lucha en todo aquello que tiene que ver con la anticoncepción de emergencia.
Yes, it is true. In Chile, the compañeras, they had to get a very difficult moment in the reproductive rights in emergency. No? Yes.
O la llamada píldora del día después.
And talking about the after the next day pill.
Lo que eso representaba para la vida de las mujeres, para su salud y para su capacidad de decidir sobre su vida,
This represented something very important in decision making of their own lives.
pareció no tener un gran peso en ese momento para el gobierno chileno,
Seemed that it was not enough for the government in Chile
dirigido por la señora Bachelet.
when she was in charge.
Pero creemos que ahora, investida de un gran poder,
But we now think that she has a powerful position.
ponga en ejercicio el mandato que le daremos las
She
mujeres
will use the mandate that the women will give her
de todo el mundo
of all the world,
y de manera especial las de América Latina,
And
las que
especially
ella conoce tanto,
the Latin American women that she knows very well,
para que defienda nuestros intereses
so she can defend our interests
con la fuerza que otras mujeres chilenas
with the strength that other Chilean women
lo han hecho en la Corte Interamericana
has been doing it in the Inter-American Court
o en los espacios diferentes de Naciones Unidas
or
y de la OEA,
or in different places in the United Nations, in the OAS,
donde han luchado a brazo partido por hacer realidad los derechos humanos de las mujeres.
where they have been fighting very hard to make this a reality.
Nancy, your comments on Michelle Bachelet and this new unit, they're bringing UNIFEM and a couple of other, they're going to units, they're going to double the budget or even more, but it's not clear yet where that money is coming from. It's been talked about for years now, and it's finally here, we think. Is it worth it? Do you think that this changes anything?
Oh, yes, I think it's going to be an important development, and we are thrilled with her appointment as head of UN Women. Yes, there were certainly challenges when she was president in terms of not being able to move forward on a reproductive rights agenda, but, it's tough to be president, and presidents can't always deliver on what they'd like to. But, when she was, head of Ministry for Health, she really made great advances in terms of access to emergency contraception, and so the commitment is there. We're excited about her heading the agency, and we're excited about the agency to be able to bring together a single focus on women.
Let's talk a little bit about the human rights aspect of it, a little bit more. Let's delve into that, dig into it if we can. Again, on your website, and I recommend that you go to the website for background information because it's got all kinds of research papers that are useful in the conversation. But talk to us about the specific laws that you think that naturally include women, and women are not generally thought to be a part of that human rights aspect of it. What protects women?
Well, obviously as human rights, traditionally developed, it was around concerns about the state and the state's interaction with, individual citizens in terms of their freedoms. Women, because our ability to get pregnant and reproduce is so central to our lives, in the 70s there was a whole kind of movement to try to not say biology is destiny. And biology isn't destiny, but it's really damn important. And the fact that only women can become pregnant. Pregnancy is a natural part of life, but it can kill you. It is necessary for the continuation of the human species, and yet it affects a woman's life, as our Supreme Court has said, like nothing else. It's too generous to the human experience and too generous to the law. So there are issues that were not traditionally thought of as human rights issues that are so central to women's ability to live in equality. For example, access to contraception. I was recently in Slovakia, and we were doing interviews with low-income women, and particularly women in the Roma community, who do not have access to contraception because the government doesn't subsidize it in Slovakia. So if the government does not subsidize contraception and you are poor, what is a couple to do? Is there a choice between not having marital relations as part of their life, or having, as some of the women we interviewed, 11 children, which is hard both physically and economically and emotionally to sustain. So it is an issue that is completely a different perspective for women than for men. So the issues of access to contraception, access to safe abortion so that women do not die unnecessarily, access to information about their reproductive health, and access to emergency obstetrics care, which is what I was talking about in India. Without access to emergency obstetrics care, women die. And we have these huge differences. You know, in Afghanistan today, women have a lifetime risk of 1 in 7 of dying in connection with pregnancy. Here in the West, 1 in 3,000. There's only one difference. We are biologically the same. Do we have access to quality obstetrics care?
You mentioned our Supreme Court. Give us a read on what you think is going to happen there. I know that there have been the statements that elsewhere in the world there's progress, but here, the clocks are being turned back. What do you see?
It's tough. You know, the last decision on abortion in the Supreme Court, which was one of the central cases, the Carhart versus Gonzalez case, the Supreme Court stepped back from its commitment to women's health in connection with abortion regulations. The court is, as everybody, and we've got law professors out here who are readers of it, we've got 4 votes that are firmly committed to the principles of Roe versus Wade, and we've got 4 votes who are not, and we've got Justice Kennedy in the middle. And right now, the Center for Reproductive Rights was tracking 500 anti-choice bills in the state legislature last year. And a lot of those bills passed. We have filed 10 new lawsuits against states in the last 15 or 16 months. These cases will make their way to the Supreme Court. Nebraska has banned abortion at 20 weeks. It's a blatant unconstitutional law. The Supreme Court has said we cannot ban abortion at that time of pregnancy. There's no exception for women's mental health, very small exception for women's physical health. It is unconstitutional on books, without question. Can we bring that case to the Supreme Court? What would Justice Kennedy do? Those are really open questions. So it is a tenuous time on the court for protection of abortion rights.
Right. And Norma, I want to talk with you about the work that you do in Latin American countries, where you're dealing not only with governments that you have to make heal, but you have the church that often would seem to interfere with your work. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage that?
Es uno de los campos quizá más difíciles para la lucha que adelantamos por los derechos humanos de las mujeres.
It is one of the most difficult cases in this fight that we have for the human rights issues.
Respetando el derecho que todas las personas tienen de tener unas creencias, una fe y unas prácticas religiosas.
Respecting the rights of belief and religiosity in their practices.
Tenemos también la firme convicción de que
we have the firm conviction that
los estados deben legislar
the states must legislate
y desarrollar políticas para todos y todas las ciudadanas
for everybody
que tienen creencias diferentes
that have different beliefs
o que no las tienen.
Or that they don't have.
Las leyes
the law
deben guiar la vida de los ciudadanos
en
su ejercicio mismo de relación con el Estado y con la sociedad. La fe debe ser un asunto privado
matter
que no se puede imponer a nadie y por lo tanto los estados
Therefore, the
deben
state
desarrollar su trabajo independientemente de las
must
respectivas
develop
iglesias.
their work independently with the church.
Creo que el problema radica en que el Estado no es claro
The state is not clear
cuando deja que las instituciones religiosas jueguen un papel predominante
when they allow the religious institutions to play a predominant role.
y las iglesias confunden su rol de guiar espiritualmente
And the
a
churches
sus
get confused in
feligreses
their role to guide spiritually their people.
y dejar al Estado gobernar de acuerdo a la voluntad y a las urgencias y necesidades de todos y todas las ciudadanas.
And leave the state alone to rule the general citizens.
Esto no sería grave si no afectase, como lo dice mi compañera Nancy,
This wouldn't be so bad if it didn't affect
los derechos de las
the rights of
mujeres
the women
al ejercicio de su libertad,
that they have to exercise their liberty,
al cuidado de su salud,
to take care of their health
en sus decisiones
and
reproductivas,
their reproductive decisions,
que además deben ser asumidas socialmente
and they have to be assumed socially
como una responsabilidad social de todos,
like a social responsibility of everyone.
aunque la cuestión biológica
The biological issue
nos haga asumirlas a las
Sometimes
have en
makes
forma
us
diferente.
assume it, the women, in a different way.
I asked you earlier because you have these huge networks, a lot of people engaged, and I asked you earlier, were you ever afraid in the work that you do? Can you talk with us a little bit about that? Because there seems to be the possibility for direct retribution. Fear.
¿Sí? Bueno, vivir en Colombia y trabajar con derechos humanos
Living in Colombia and working in human rights
y en el movimiento de paz es algo difícil.
and in the peace movement is somewhat difficult.
Algunos gobiernos respetan mucho a los defensores de derechos humanos.
Some governments respect the human rights
Consideran
activists.
que la labor que cumplen
They think that the work they do
es fundamental para garantizar la democracia.
is fundamental for democracy.
Pero hay otros gobiernos que consideran que quienes denunciamos los atropellos
But there are other governments that think that that speak,
somos enemigos de la democracia.
we are the enemies of democracy.
Y eso,
Enemies of democracy.
Democracy, yes.
y eso torna difícil nuestro accionar para los defensores y las defensoras de derechos humanos en varios países de América Latina
So this is difficult in several countries in Latin America,
y muy especialmente en Colombia.
especially in Colombia.
Guardamos la esperanza que con el nuevo gobierno las cosas varíen.
We hope that with the new government, things will change.
And in fact, you were called the terrorists there, right? With the old regime.
Sí,
I was called,
el señor presidente Uribe
the President Uribe
conceptualizaba que todos los que trabajábamos por los derechos humanos y por la paz en nuestro país
conceptualized that all that we worked for the human rights and for the peace in the country,
éramos aliados de los terroristas
we're the terrorist allies.
porque a la vez que exigíamos al Estado respeto por los derechos de las personas,
Because we were asking the state to respect the people,
pedíamos a los diferentes actores armados
we were asking the different actors that were armed
que estableciesen un diálogo con el Estado
that they should establish a dialogue with the state
para que colombianos y colombianas de diferentes visiones y tendencias
so that Colombian men and women of different tendencies
pudiéramos alcanzar algún día
could reach
el derecho a tener un espacio en nuestro país
someday to have a space in our country
y que para todos brille el mismo sol.
and that we will be under the same sun.
Pero el gobierno cree que hablar de diálogo
But the government thought that talking about dialogue,
es ser cómplice de la insurgencia
it's being an accomplice of the insurgency.
y luchar por los derechos humanos
And we fight for the human rights.
es hacer quedar mal al Estado
And they say that
en el concierto de las naciones.
we don't make their role be a good one in the concert of the nations.
Well, as long as you smile, Norma, you know, it's that engaging smile. It's not a terror. We're going to take some questions from the audience, so be prepared. And while you are busy raising your hands and I know that we have so many experts in the audience here, this will be a lot of fun. But I do want Nancy for you to talk about the Philippines and your work there and what's going on.
Yeah, we started working in the Philippines about 6 years ago on a ban in Manila City on the provision of modern contraceptives in government facilities. And about 70% of women in Manila rely on the government to get their contraceptives. And there's nothing but natural family planning that can be offered in those government health clinics. So we did a report on the tragic consequences of that. Again, if women can't have access to contraception, they can't have control of their health and lives. We have since also filed a lawsuit, again, at the national level there. And that is still winding its way through the courts. But if we are not successful with our partners in battling that, it's a case that we would probably take to the CEDAW Committee, which is the UN committee that oversees the International Treaty on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, to establish that it is a violation of women's equality not to give them access to contraception. So people think of these issues about access to basic contraception as being something of the past. They are alive today, and the battle still goes on about whether women can have this basic control over their lives.
Great. Yes, sir, you have a question. Yeah?
Stand up. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Perhaps I should introduce myself.
Please do.
Thandabantu Nhlapo from the University of Cape Town in South Africa, a member of the International Advisory Board. And we've heard in this very interesting panel discussion that there is a gap between the commitments of governments and the will to implement some of the things to which they have committed. We've also heard that the area of sexual and reproductive rights continues to be a contested area. I think you said that. And the question I would like to ask really is something that I'm used to because I work on these issues on the African continent, and it's the question of culture. I am quite keen to find out from both panelists what the influence of the multiculturalism that is found in all of the countries in which you operate has been on your work. I mean, do you find that this has influenced the way that you work? In particular, do you find that you have to work harder or indeed just smarter to overcome some of the very deeply rooted and embedded cultural obstacles posed in society? And if you could give some examples of how you have had to navigate that territory. Thank you.
And in fact, in some cultures, it is the women who carry on cultural practices that would seem to be detrimental to women. But how do you approach that? You work in 50 countries, so that in each country is a different set of expectations of what you can and cannot do, or should do, or what people will expect.
Yeah, let me just start by saying one of the countries that we work in is here in the United States, and I'm quite aware of the cultural context that we deal with here, particularly when I'm talking to colleagues, say, in Scandinavia, and they cannot understand the cultural context of the United States. By meaning, why are we both, on the one hand, seeing such a open society about sexuality, and on the other hand, a completely repressive society about sexuality?
And so I start from a place of understanding that we have a really complex cultural context here, which makes our advocacy difficult. In terms of working globally, it is why we partner closely with groups who work at the national level. And they set the agenda for the entry point for working on issues. So for example, in Kenya, when we first began working with the Federation for Women's Lawyers, we did not begin by working on the abortion issue. They thought that the entry point to work on was the treatment of women when they went to go deliver in maternity hospitals in Nairobi. And that was the point for starting to talk about and to bring into consciousness this issue about women's reproductive rights. So we did a report with them on the abuse, the verbal abuse, the physical abuse that women are subjected to, their detention for inability to pay costs, that they were detained with their babies, not allowed to leave the hospital. That was the first point. And only through working together on that did Peter Kenya begin to say, hey, we now feel like the entry point is there to work on the abortion issue as well. So that is how we work with our partners so that the agenda gets set for the entry points and that we work together to see where the best traction can be made.
Do we have another question? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Sakina Yakubi. I am the Executive Director of Afghan Institute of Learning, and we are really working with women and children in area of reproductive health. And I'm trying to see how you take this issue of religion. When you have a group of really fanatic religious group in a country, and then also you have the constitution that allows the women's right, human's right that be implemented, and you have a government that who is has a weak leadership and will not implement that constitution. And then here you have an opposition group that is a religious, restricted religious leader you have there. How do you take this issue, especially when you see that the women are being violated against their reproductive rights? About maternal child mortality rate is the second highest in Afghanistan, for example. If you come to a country like that, how do you advise them? How do you try to really hold the government accountable for this and to really be backing the woman? Because the woman is just dying there and nobody to protect him. How do you tackle this issue? I'm really interested to learn from you and here, and especially in my country, there is a lot of problem. So my question is that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
Thank
Norma, would you like to start with?
Sí ve en América Latina y el Caribe que parecerían culturas muy similares.
In American cultures, Latin America, in the Caribbean, that would be something similar, somehow similar cultures.
Y existiendo en la mayoría de ellos, de estos países, constituciones que declaran a los estados laicos.
And they have constitutions that the states are not religious.
El procedimiento y las relaciones que se siguen varían muchísimo.
The procedures and the processes are very different from each other.
Hay países donde las luchas tienen que librarse directamente.
There are countries where you have to fight directly.
No nos garantiza que los logros se acumulen y vayamos siempre en una misma dirección.
There is no guarantee that our achievements are going to be accumulated and that will follow the same direction.
Como lo constatamos, por ejemplo, ahora de manera especial en Centroamérica.
Like we can see especially in Central America these days.
Donde los derechos sexuales y reproductivos de las mujeres han sufrido un serio retroceso.
Where the women's rights and the reproductive rights have a setback.
Por eso el movimiento feminista y el movimiento de mujeres en general,
that's why the feminist movement and the women's movement in general,
con nuestras aliadas en el norte,
we're allies of the north,
buscamos impactar en primera instancia en las leyes y políticas públicas a nivel de los estados.
Look to have an impact on the policies of the states.
pero también en estos espacios supranacionales,
and also in the supranational spaces,
como Naciones Unidas
like,
o la
United
Organización
Nations
de Estados
or
Americanos,
the OAS,
para que se produzca una jurisprudencia,
so that there are a set of laws,
unos mandatos,
mandates,
unas recomendaciones a
and
los estados
recommendations to the states and governments
que nos ayuden en alguna forma
that would help us somewhat
para tener herramientas y reclamar a los estados.
have the tools and do our claims and work to the states and governments.
Esto no es automático.
This is not automatic.
Seguramente esta herramienta la tendremos que usar durante muchos años para alcanzar lo que queremos.
We probably will have to use this tool for many years until we get our results.
Pero soñamos con que el esfuerzo que nosotras hacemos
But we dream that the effort that we do
y el que hacen las mujeres asiáticas y africanas
and that all the women of the world do,
con la solidaridad de las europeas
with the solidarity of the Europeans
y de fundaciones
and the
prestigiosas
prestigious foundations,
de la academia
with the academy,
y de las personas realmente comprometidas con los derechos humanos,
and people compromised in human rights,
que podamos avanzar positivamente
we will go ahead
y no
we will go,
retroceder jamás.
and we'll never go back to what it was before.
Thank you, Norma. Did you want to? Thank you.
Well, I think my answer is part and parcel of the answer about the cultural question, because of course religion is part of culture. You know, I used to, in this country, they always talk about the culture wars, and part of what always bothered me about that is it seemed sort of unsubstantial. They're actually fundamentally different religious perspectives, so religious wars I always thought would be more appropriate. But, you know, we have to work in the same way. We work with our partners, you know, figuring out the entry points. We work with the commitments that those governments have made to human rights. And so that has to be the point of the battle. But of course, it is these are substantial battles about fundamentally different worldviews. But the fact that governments have agreed to certain human rights commitments, you know, gives both our partners and the center working with them the basis to say, you have committed to a different perspective, and that perspective has to be, you know, realized for your women citizens.
Next question. Yes.
I'm Steve Foster from the Overbrook Foundation. Nancy, I wanted to ask you, the Center for Reproductive Rights relatively recently announced that it's out of its strategic planning that it would focus more on human rights as advocacy tools inside the United States. And I'm wondering what that actually means in terms of how your work is different or has changed. And the other thing I was interested in with Norma and you, how do you see the relationship between what happens in the U.S. and in Latin America and vice versa in terms of either advancing or repressing reproductive rights advocacy?
So in the strategic plan that the center adopted 3 years ago, we were very clear that we were taking a human rights approach in both our work in the U.S. and globally. And part of that, of course, was a mission commitment to make sure that we were not doing what is very American culturally centric, which is talking about constitutional rights here and talking about human rights overseas. But it was also about making sure that we were using the full toolkit that we use as human rights advocates elsewhere in the world. So fact-finding reports in the United States to bring a spotlight to issues that we may not be able to sue on, but they're important to hold the government accountable. So we did a fact-finding report last year on the conditions under which abortion providers are providing their services, that they are harassed, that they are murdered in the case of Dr. Tiller, that they are under constant both regulatory and physical siege, and that they are in fact human rights defenders who are standing up and making services available to women, and they should be seen in that context and not ostracized and stigmatized. So that gave us an opportunity to talk about the issue and frame the debate differently than we would be if we were suing. We have a report coming out tomorrow on the Hyde, restrictions on public funding for women, and bringing women's stories to the table about that. Again, that case the case was sued and lost back 30 years ago now. look at Professor Law, who worked on that case. So the Constitution is set. We have to work on that in other ways to bring light to that issue. We're also engaging the United States government in a different way with its own treaty obligations. So we report in the annual reporting to the UN process on how the U.S. is living up to its commitments. So it's broadening the toolkits, and it's bringing a different discussion. We are stuck in a very stale and uninteresting debate here in the United States about whether the Supreme Court in Roe versus Wade, and I'm looking at Professor Siegel, who's written about this a lot, was that a good or bad decision? Did it create the backlash? Should it happen? Well, we have to have a different discussion, which is about why women are suffering under the laws and policies that are happening now in the United States. And talking about that in a different context, I think, breathes fresh air into the discussion.
Yes, Linda? Well, thank you so much for this very interesting discussion about the work of both of your centers. So, Nancy, earlier you mentioned something about that it's women who are pregnant who are responsible for carrying and delivering children. But really, I think you were also alluding to the fact that it's really everyone's responsibility to raise the next generation and to lead to the production and ongoing nature of society. And a number of us have been talking about the importance of working with men and reaching out to men in terms of public education, in terms of being stakeholders. It's true, women hold up half the sky and probably a little bit more, but that's only half. So I'm wondering if both of you could talk a little bit about how you are engaging men at various levels in your own work. Thanks. Norma, did you want to start with that?
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
CLADEM ha decidido desde cuando se adelantó la cumbre de derechos humanos en Viena,
CLADEM, since the Vienna summit started,
convocar a una serie de aliados para que comprendan y apoyen nuestro trabajo.
Put together a series of allies to support our work.
En este sentido, consideramos que el movimiento de derechos humanos en su totalidad es nuestro aliado.
We consider that the human rights, all of it, is our ally.
Pero también movimientos afroamericanos y de pueblos originarios,
movements of African countries and originary peoples,
que han vivido discriminaciones muy grandes y que afectan de manera especial sus vidas,
that have lived experiences of discrimination that have affected their lives,
pueden desarrollar sensibilidades frente a nuestras propuestas.
Can develop sensitivities to our proposals.
Por eso cada vez más buscamos que nuestros informes sombras,
that's why we look that our reports,
en relación con 5 tratados,
in relation to 5 treaties,
4 ante Naciones Unidas y 1 ante la OEA,
4 to United Nations and 1 to OAS,
sean construidos colectivamente,
should be built collectively,
o por lo menos respaldados una vez que los presentamos.
Or should be backed once we present them.
Este diálogo contribuye a crear puentes.
This dialogue contributes to create bridges
entre movimientos
between movements
que históricamente se han desarrollado independientemente,
that historically has been separated,
pero que vamos confluyendo,
but we all are getting together,
porque la lucha por los derechos humanos, como usted bien lo dijo,
because the human rights
debe ser de todos y de todas,
is a fight for everyone, men and women,
y cada quien debe ser capaz de sentir el dolor, la discriminación y las angustias que viven los otros.
And each one of them should feel the pain, discrimination and the anguish that the others feel.
Una vez que las mujeres logramos tener confianza en nosotras mismas,
once we women achieve trust in ourselves,
estamos desarrollando la fuerza para trabajar en conjunto con otros y otras.
Confidently, we are ready to work with the rest.
Sí. La maternidad, en definitiva, es una función social.
Maternity is a social function.
Thank you, Norma. I want to follow up with Nancy. Do you find that other progressive human rights social movements take up this cause?
Well, yes, my answer to the question about the men question is that we work to both mainstream and to educate. So a lot of times when we're working with human rights bodies, when we began doing work with the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, the commissioners were overwhelmingly and maybe at one point exclusively male, and we would bring these issues to them again and again with briefings and materials and background and framing. So that's the sort of education piece. The mainstreaming piece is it's been a major goal of the center to get mainstream human rights organizations to take on the issue of women's reproductive rights as well. And we have been delighted that in recent years, really in the last 6 years or so, Human Rights Watch has taken on working on reproductive rights issues, including abortion rights. Amnesty International has taken on working on these issues. So getting reproductive rights issues onto the agenda of mainstream human rights organizations. When I mentioned the Human Rights Law Network in India, that was a group that leading experts on human rights, leading practitioners in the Indian Supreme Court, but they hadn't worked on reproductive rights issues before. And so again, Louisa Cabal and I went and met with them and got reproductive rights interested and onto the agenda. So mainstreaming and education and mainstreaming.